Hi, welcome to my presentation. I'll take just a second here to introduce myself. My name is Jenna Hart. I am a lecturer in writing in the Department of General Education. I've just finished my 5th year here teaching first year writing. I am also working on a PhD in rhetoric and composition, so I've had a unique experience this year of being both a teacher of many online courses and also a student of online courses. So I am here to talk a little bit about my experience in these environments. My presentation is called More Than Tech Support, Metacognitive Approaches to Facilitating Dialogue in Online Courses. Much of what I'll discuss here is how to best utilize the discussion board function of our learning management systems to help provide support for students as they navigate these new technologies and as they attempt to have meaningful conversations with their peers in online formats. As you know, the pandemic has ushered in a new kind of pedagogy. I've jokingly been calling it pandemic pedagogy, but some of what we've learned, we've been doing for a long time in these online environments, but we're becoming maybe more refined as we all gain more exposure to these ways of teaching. So, of course, we have been using our institutional learning management systems to teach our courses online. I have considered through this process that we must recognize that in doing so, we're no longer just teaching the courses in our disciplines that we've been assigned to teach. When we prepare content for online platforms, we are also accommodating our students to new and online technologies. It's a different responsibility we have, or an additional responsibility we have, to help our students get used to these technologies so they can feel confident to perform the work in our disciplines. I have a source here from Miles Kimball, who is a technical writing scholar. He talks about how using technical writing accommodates a user to the technology. I am asking us to consider what roles we have as instructors to use this principle of accommodating students to technologies. I'm suggesting that instructors provide online instruction that supports the student's use of technology, bolstering their ability to intuitively utilize the software, and then also, in addition, metacognitively approach the genre of online conversations. So my work here is twofold. One, to use the technology in a meaningful way. I think we can provide better instructions for that. And then two, in the case of a discussion board, how can we help students better understand that genre and what we're looking for in the kinds of interactions that we expect them to have there. So I suspect that many of us find that our digital conversations occur on discussion boards. In my online courses, the discussion board takes the place of a live classroom, but face-to-face engagement can really be difficult to replicate virtually. I'm sure many of you have read those "I totally agree with you" comments that students leave to one another that suggest maybe they didn't actually read their peers' post, but they're just quickly kind of responding in less meaningful ways. So I've been considering how can we make this more meaningful for students. I think we must first, before we start diving into that pedagogy, think about how we are making our discussion boards visible, accessible, and accommodate the students to that technology first, then approach how we can best facilitate a good conversation between our students in these spaces. So I just have a very quick tutorial here. I'll send out this PowerPoint after the presentation. I'm sure the Center for Teaching and Learning will make these things accessible just in case you need a quick tutorial for how to find discussion boards, because not only are our students being accommodated to this technology, but we are too in some ways. So very briefly, you can find the discussion boards under assessments. Most of us probably know this, but just as a quick review. For us, it helps to create a forum first, and I think the system requires that you do. I kind of think about these forums as like a unit. It can house multiple topics. So generally, a course that I teach might have 3 forums or 3 units with individual topics embedded in there. Sometimes I'll even create a forum that's like the welcome forum, which you'll see in a minute, where students kind of post their first introductions. But that's your first step, is creating that forum. Once you create the form, you can very easily actually click Save and Add Topic. It's just right there at the base of the screen. And I'll move my screen so you can see that a little better. Save and Add Topic, it just pops right up. Pretty easy once that's there. You'll, of course, create the content once you get here. So you'll title the discussion and you'll write out the description of the assignment. After you do this, this will make the discussion available for your students, but I'm going to suggest a way to make it even more accessible for them. So they can find your discussion board by also clicking assessment and then discussion. But again, I have another trick that I like to use. So especially at the beginning of the semester, I will link the discussion board to an announcement on the course homepage. When students open up your course, the very first thing they see is that homepage. So I'm really intentional about the kinds of announcements that I make there and the directions I provide in those spaces. I have found students have a difficult time finding discussion posts that they need to complete along with other assignments too. So I always create a link to the discussion board so that they can click it from that place and see exactly what they need to do. It's a pretty simple process, but in case you've never done it before, you highlight the name of the discussion. You click this little dude right here. I'm not really sure what it is. Probably like a symbol for link. And then you'll be able to see the discussion, and you can insert it as a quick link. It's a really useful tool, and it's a way for your students to see exactly where you want them to go as soon as they get to that home page. So in doing so, in creating this kind of quick link version of your discussion, I find that students are more able to access the content themselves. So you're kind of fighting the first part of that battle of getting them just kind of used to and accessing online content. This is a picture of what it will look like once you've done this. Your homepage will now welcome students, and it will tell them the assignment they need to complete. You can do this every week if you're teaching an online course. You could do this twice a week depending on how many assignments you have. But I take the time always, whatever assignment is due for that week, to link to the homepage. It just helps students to access that stuff a little bit easier. So now that we've kind of set up the mechanics of setting up the post where your students can find it, maybe you've kind of like gotten a little quick review of how to set it up themselves, I want to talk about the directions themselves that we're posting in these discussion board prompts. What I have on the following slide is a pretty long instructions for discussion posts that I have had my students complete in a class. And as we move through this presentation, you'll see how I've revised those instructions to be more clear about what I'm looking for. So these are the instructions that I give my students for their Introduce Yourself first discussion board for the course. Instead of just asking them to write about themselves, I ask them to do some kind of creative introduction through either using YouTube or Prezi. So you can see here I ask if they make an original post and respond to 2 classmates. I tell them it's a pass-fail assignment. I create each one of these myself. I create an About Me video and a Prezi for the course. They can watch both of them. Then I ask them to post a video or a Prezi of themselves. I ask several questions to kind of give them something to talk about, and I answer these myself. But I let them know they can really talk about anything that they want to tell their classmates in the course about themselves. I ask them to respond to 2 classmates. I said, try to see what you have in common. Our classwork operates at its best when we have the opportunity to get to know others in the virtual classroom. I don't think this is a very poorly written assignment, but I do have some suggestions for improvement, and I'll show you how I ended up actually revising this. First, I want to talk about the assumptions that I made in my first creation of that assignment. I assumed many things. If you noticed, I asked my students to watch my About Me video, but I didn't link it to that discussion board, so they would have had to go somewhere else and locate that in order to be able to see a sample. So not a major deal, but it could be really useful to have that source linked directly to that post, which I'll show you how to do. I also assume that my students know how to respond to the discussion board, and I mean that literally. Like, they need to know, sometimes need to be told, like, what to click in order to respond to that board. You know, this is a kind of an aside, but if you're on social media, and if Facebook or Twitter ever does an update, we all kind of freak out, like, oh no, I can't figure out how to post my photo to Instagram right now because something has changed about the homepage. We need to remember, especially with younger students or their first year or second year, every time they approach, or when they approach these learning management systems, it's like their Facebook has updated and they're not really sure where to go to post these things. So I'm suggesting that we provide a little bit more explicit instruction just for the nuts and bolts mechanics of this process. 2, and maybe even more alarmingly, I assume that my students know how to create a YouTube video or use Prezi. I think they probably do, or likely have had this experience in high school, maybe even middle school, but it's an assumption, right? And just because they may have been exposed to these softwares or these technologies before, if I'm asking them to use them, it doesn't hurt me to provide a little bit more support on how to use those services. Also, I assume in that discussion that my students will inherently understand why I ask them to complete that task. Now, I did explain a little bit what I was hoping to achieve by helping them connect to their classmates, but the purpose of this assignment could have been much more explicit. What I was quick to discover, too, after assigning this simple, or what I thought was simple, discussion board task was that my students had questions, and they needed support to be able to use the technology involved in the task that I had created. As you'll see on the next slide, I have revised this set of instructions, and I think it makes it a little bit more clear for what I would be expecting students to do. So in the same way that we discussed the process of creating the discussion board, again, we need to describe the process of responding. It's our responsibility to teach students how to use these learning management systems. The same is not always possible to talk them through using YouTube ourselves, but there's tech support that I'll show you for these softwares that we can link. And then there's a metacognitive element that we need. With a few quick sentences, I could really better explain why those students need to have those digital discussions and what I'm getting at. So those are really the 3 tasks I had. Explain better how to respond to the board, give them support for using the softwares that I'm asking them to use, and then give a little bit more of a purpose. If you've done any sort of work with ROD, with tilt, or if you've heard how to tilt an assignment, it's kind of what I'm talking about with that last point there. Some sort of element to say this is why I'm having you do this would be more useful. So as you can see on this slide, the font that's in red are the changes that I've added, and I will talk through those. So at the beginning of the post, I have added language that says the purpose of this assignment, a la tilt, is to familiarize yourself with your classmates, and it helps me get to know you as well. Letting them know that I want to get to know them, I think is important. I'm not just asking them to do this assignment as like a check in the box or something like that. I really do genuinely, it helps me to get to know them, and using the digital sort of story with a video or a Prezi helps me remember them better too. So not only will we get to know each other through the work, but they'll get to experience communicating through other genres with YouTube or Prezi, and then also reply in writing to your classmates. So I've let them know not only are you getting the skill of getting to know each other, but you're now getting to practice a little bit with some digital communication. Being able to create a YouTube video, as you can see by this presentation itself, is a skill that we're leaning on more and more in the workforce. So I'm giving them a chance to play with that a little bit, and I'm telling them that explicitly in the instructions. I said, why is it important to learn either of these things? Classes are being offered online. You're going to be expected to communicate in new ways and technologies throughout your college career and in your work after college. Since this is a composition course, that's what I teach, this is a place where you can get some practice acquainting yourself with new ways of composing. So I tried to really tie the intentionality behind the assignment to the course content too, which you could, of course, do creatively depending on what you're teaching. As you'll see in my directions, I've linked my About Me and my Prezi. I did that the same way that I linked the discussion board to the home page. You highlight it and click that embed link icon, and you can add any of your course content to the page itself. I assume students will be much more likely to click these links when they're embedded right here in the conversation that we're having, like on the actual directions. 2, on bullet point number 2, I've told them where to click to start the new thread. There's at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Start New Thread, and that's what students need to click to start their own discussion post. I've answered, maybe you have too, but I've answered questions where students are like, I found the discussion board, but I don't know where to post. So by giving them just that simple directive, you can kind of help accommodate them to that process. I kept most of the prompt the same here, the questions I thought were fine, but I added a little bit of support. Before writing, I said, think about the genre you're choosing. What makes a good YouTube video? What makes a good Prezi? Using both YouTube and Prezi, just like their how-to guides, I provided some tech support here. So I just want to keep in mind, I didn't make a video that's how to make a YouTube video. I found one on YouTube, and it's actually pretty useful, and I linked it here. The same with Prezi. What makes a good Prezi? You can look at a Prezi that explains that to you. This was not a lot of work for me, but it helps to set a standard for what I'm looking for, and it helps to accommodate the students to the process. They're able to look at not only my sample with my information, but also like more useful kind of like step-by-step processes that they can follow through just these online sources. Finally, I noticed, as I've kind of alluded to before, that the responses to other peers often are where students are kind of short in their approach. They don't usually say very much. So I added some intentional language here. Think about the way you respond to your classmates. Remember that online discussions take the place of the regular face-to-face contact, so consider your tone. A good response will refer to a couple of very specific pieces of your classmates' presentation, really emphasizing that you are considerate enough to view their work and be interested in them. I don't think that students take it personally when people very quickly respond to their work, but they might notice that someone actually did take the time to pay attention to the things that they say and respond to it, like, oh, I have a cat too, or that's also my favorite movie, or whatever the thing they're talking about. So I'm asking students to be more specific with their responses. This also helps me grade them better, because by giving more specific instruction of what I'm looking for, I can better point to a grade, like, hey, look, you did this thing perfectly, or, oh, look, you didn't do the thing that I asked you to do explicitly. So being clear in these directives, it only serves to benefit you as a teacher assessing this work, and as a student working to complete it. To conclude here, I suggest that to more clearly articulate prompts in these forums, we can think about how technical writers communicate with clarity, organization, and thinking about user accessibility at the forefront of our written instructions. Scholars of online teaching note that students are unfamiliar with discussion boards, but when instructors clearly communicate the rationale for using the board and the goal of the discussion, students will be more motivated to engage in dialogue. If we familiarize ourselves with how to use a learning management system to our advantage, we can empower students to utilize technology and consider the conventions of an unfamiliar genre. The sources I've used are quoted here. I'm happy to send them to you via email. Thank you so much for attending this presentation.